Consistently in the top 15 most dangerous places to follow Jesus. The rate of persecution against believers in Jesus in India has been said to have quadrupled in 2024, with the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom labeling the subcontinent a country of particular concern. I'm Regan King, and joined as always by my good friend and co-host for this edition of the Persecuted Church. Good evening, Alistair.
It's good to be back. I know we've looked at India once before, but things have changed even in the time. It's not so many months ago when we featured it, but the increase in the attacks against Christians particularly, I mean, it's generally, I mean, we always accept that there's the attacks against Islam because of the Hindu-Islam problem dating back to pre-1948 when they were divided. But the attacks against Christianity, it'll be surprising to some people, because I think most people I meet in the streets, and you talk to them about persecution against Christians in India, they're surprised because they think of the Hindu religion as being a very peaceful religion. And of course, it's peaceful to its own people, like a lot of religions are, but if you are, particularly they see Christianity now as a major threat to unrest in the nation, they are some terrible, terrible attacks coming against Christian churches.
Yeah, very, very definitely. And in the previous report, we talked about how there was particular problems with mob rule, police not intervening, standing by while Christians were being beaten up and abused in various ways. That has continued to persist, particularly grim reports coming from Manipur as well. But there was one story recently which CBN reports on, in which a whole church found itself under attack. They were beaten with metal rods. Here's that report from our friends at CBN.
At a church service in Western India, Christians have been attacked with iron rods, resulting in serious injuries, according to a report from Christian Solidarity Worldwide. Well, lawyer and investigator Cliff Smith joins us to give us the details. So, Cliff, what can you tell us?
Well, according to the Christian Post report, this happened in the state of Rajasthan in Western India, and is a group of 200 people stormed this church building, vandalized property, and hurt some others. And that basically, after this was the case, police questioned the Christians about and accused them of forced conversions. And at least according to this report, they didn't take any action against the people that did the vandalizing. And so that is sort of what we know based on that report. You know, this is a complaint we have heard more often in India in recent years from Christians in India. It's been very controversial what is going on and why it's happening, but it is for example, the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom has named India a country of particular concern. And listed various abuses of this sort. The State Department, on the other hand, did not do so, unlike Pakistan and some other states that have been labeled such, at least in the past, and other states around the world that have, Iran, for example. So it's sort of a split verdict, but you have heard complaints of these kinds of religious violence from India increasing in recent years. You've heard those kinds of complaints.
Well, I think folks at home are probably, more familiar with the idea of Islamic persecution and what happens with Christians in the Middle East. But Hindu persecution, that's a new thing for a lot of people. Is this kind of more common than maybe most folks realize?
It's hard to say. I more than most folks realize, I certainly think that's probably so. I do think you have to look at the differences between sort of Islamic persecution and Hindu persecution. They're not quite the same. Islamic persecution comes from, generally speaking, radical Islam or Islamism, sort of a theocratic interpretation of Islam that requires Christians to be second-class citizens or otherwise, not be treated in full equality with their Muslim neighbors in different countries. Hindu persecution is not religiously based, at least in the sense, same way that Islam is. It's a much more it's a much more communal, much more culturally based. There's a lot of concern among Hindus that they need to be united in a nationalistic sort of way to protect them, ironically, probably from Muslims. And this has led to things like anti-conversion laws, which ostensibly are aimed at forced conversions, which have been reported, for example, by Hindu girls who are, according to many, are forced or coerced or otherwise tricked into marrying Muslim men. And usually Christians are not the primary targets of these sort of anti-conversion laws. However, that doesn't mean that they can't fall victim to them. And I think that, like blasphemy laws in many parts of the world, anti-conversion laws, I'm not sure they have a place, period, which I frankly think the same thing of anti-blasphemy laws. I think God can stand up for himself. Nonetheless, I don't really think they have a place, but even to the degree you could argue that they have some sort of good reason in some circumstances, you'd still be stuck with the fact that they are often used in reality to settle community disputes, to accuse someone of a crime, when really your beef is something else entirely, and really it doesn't have much to do with the actual issue at hand.
That's very insightful, and you brought a lot of clarity to the distinction. Obviously, I'm half Indian. The state that this happened in, Rajasthan, I share a name with that state. So this is a little personal. How should folks around the world be praying for Christian believers in India?
Well, I think you should always pray for any believers, be they in the majority or the minority, to be willing to speak the truth when it's hard, and be able to speak the truth to whoever it is, regardless of their status. I think that, doing that is biblical. It's in being impartial and treating all people the same, and standing up for things that are wrong, regardless. I also think that, India, it's different than Iran, right? It's different from Saudi Arabia. It is a democracy. It has problems. It has foibles. And I think there are political trends that are problematic for Christians. But I do think that coaxing it can work. Trying to encourage its leaders to do better can work in a way that I don't necessarily think it will in, say, Iran. And I think that that's worth knowing when Americans, interact with Indians or the Indian government or travel to India. I think that's something that's important to remember, is that, it's capable of change, and it's capable of doing better than it currently is. And I think Christians, to support their brothers and sisters when these kind of bad things do happen, should just keep that in mind.
Cliff Smith, this was very, very informative and very helpful. Let's be praying for our brothers and sisters in India. Cliff, thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
That's a really, really good report there from CBN, our friends down there. And even the presenter there was kind of surprised and pointing out that things have changed rapidly under this present regime, the leaders of the nation, because they are basically evangelical Hindus now running the country, and they want the nation to be free, although they've got their constitution is supposedly free religious practice and freedom and thinking and all the rest, but they are more and more coming against Christians and any other religious factor in the nation. So, the report ended with something we keep saying as Persecuted Church here, is pray for our Christian brothers in the nation, because they are facing battles to keep their religious freedom and their practice of Christianity. It's a nation that was brought up as it came under the rule of the British Empire all those years ago. Christianity was rife and released into the nation, but it's turned so rapidly in the last 10 years particularly, but in the last 3 or 4 years, rapidly, I think.
Well, we see India is still in the Open Doors watch list of most dangerous places to be a Christian, ranked number 11, but they have noted the metric has risen in relation to the severity of persecution, as it has in many other places. It's still maintained its spot it had in the previous year in 2004 at number 11. 2024. For 2025, it's still ranked as number 11, but there's been a notable increase. We had in 2023 734 incidents of attack, violence against Christians. This is not just about verbal abuse or ostracization or some sort of alienation. We're talking about acts of deliberate violence, generally not just against an individual, oftentimes against, as we saw in the report, whole congregations. And that was a congregation of 50 that was set upon by a mob of 200 with iron rods, resulting in catastrophic and severe injuries. But we're now seeing an increase in violent incidents, up from 734 in 2023. In 2024, the United Christian Forum documented 834 incidents of violence against Christians, averaging more than 2 attacks per day, which is very significant.
That's a lot. I mean, I've ministered on the West Coast, and there's strong Christian communities along the West Coast there, and at the time they seem to have a freedom to practice their religion. The churches seem to be thriving, but even there I hear now from people who are ministering there that they have to be far more cautious. And I remember doing this when I ministered in other parts, Islamic nations particularly, where I said, you have a freedom now, but be prepared, you might have to go underground again. And I think this is definitely the case in India, as this report talks about a country of particular concern, and you never thought of India in that way 10 years ago or even 15 years ago, because it seemed to be a nation which was free. People were allowed to practice whatever faith they felt to. There was a freedom to work. But now it's become very much like the Islamic nations, where you are you're mistreated. I was going to say treated, but you're mistreated if you follow any other faith other than Hindus. You lose all your rights, basically, and just like in some of the other nations, you are a second-class citizen.
It's a very, very difficult situation and plight. And as you were alluding to earlier, it's driven primarily by this Hindu nationalism and, of course, very politicized by the governing party, the BJP. This idea that to be Indian means to be Hindu, and any departure from that alienates you from your identity in some way. Open Doors reports that this sees a great deal of challenge with places where authorities are linked with Hindu extremism. Christians who attend house churches risk attack, and as extremist mobs continue to target churches, often interrupting church services. Christian women are at risk of sexual violence, while men can face physical torture and mob attacks, with church leaders being particularly vulnerable. And I'm sure you've had that experience and observation as well. When I was in India, it was interesting. I was able to travel quite freely with this brother in Christ and others in his church team, but we had multiple meetings in that whole time. We were preaching in multiple places throughout that period, but on the Sunday, because they knew that Sunday they would be monitored, we were not able to meet with them because there was the concern that would draw not just problems for them, but problems for us as well, and potentially hamper other visits in the future. So it was a case of, okay, we need to consider the bigger picture here. We have basically 2 full weeks of ministry where they're not being monitored so much. It would be nice to gather with them on the Sunday, but that's the day that they would be particularly monitored and at risk. So this is a very, very live issue with people, and in particular, there were some reports that I was seeing from that region that I had the privilege of visiting in Uttar Pradesh, where we see under the Uttar Pradesh law, allurement is something that they accuse Christians of being involved in, alluring people away from basic
Hindu
Hinduism.
religion,
Uttar Pradesh's anti-conversion law outlaws conversion from one religion to another by misrepresentation, force, undue influence, coercion, allurement, or by any fraudulent means. And though international law would back this law up regarding its prohibition of force, and we would agree with that law, there should be no force to believe anything, the law's definition of allurement is cripplingly broad and itself in tension with international law. It means the offer of any temptation, including gratification, easy money, free education in a reputed school run by any religious body, better lifestyle, or divine displeasure. So if you're proclaiming God's righteous judgment in some way, or you're, that could be deemed allurement. If you're talking about peace through suffering, that could be deemed allurement. If you are kind, if you see someone in need and you offer food, and that individual begins to, that could be deemed allurement.
Well, I mean, this has come such a long way from how it all started. When you think of the subcontinent, which is India and Pakistan and Sri Lanka down in the islands, a lot of the teaching, education was brought in by religious groups. The early Catholic churches and the Protestant churches would go in a charitable way, and they would educate people because they were uneducated generally. They would provide medical services. I mean, like a lot of the hospitals that are started because of Catholic churches and Protestant churches going out and seeing the needs, the desperate needs of people, and would set up the hospitals, set up the churches as a reach out, not as an allurement as is being used now, but showing the love of God, love of Jesus. So it's come such a long way in a relatively short time, in a couple of 2 to 3 generations. It's particularly the last generation.
Well, especially in the last 6 years. So it's in the last 6 years that we have the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom identifying and designating India as a country of particular concern, a CPC, in relation to its religious freedom allowances. And they say in their report that was only released at the end of March of 2025, religious freedom conditions in India continued to deteriorate in 2024 as attacks and discrimination against religious minorities continued to rise. And they put this primarily as fueled by nationalist rhetoric from the BJP party, including Prime Minister Narendra Modi. These attacks include vigilante violence, targeted and arbitrary killings, demolition of property and places of worship. And the recommendation in the U.S. is that the Department of State designates India as a CPC based on statutory definitions laid out in the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998. And under this, CPC countries are those that engage in or tolerate particularly severe violations of religious freedoms, defining that term as systemic, ongoing, egregious violations such as torture, prolonged detention without charge, forced disappearance, and flagrant denial of the right to life, liberty, or the security of persons. So, I mean, it's quite a grim assessment.
It is a very grim, and it's what we've seen regularly in the Islamic nations, where people, if you come against the regime, the religion, you disappear, or you are beaten, or you're tortured, and so on. But the other thing that I know from India is now its population is the highest in the world. It's surpassed China. But more than that, I see because of their economic prosperity, they have such an influence on other nations. I've ministered, I think you might have done, in Nepal too. And there's, even in Nepal now, the Hinduism and Buddhism is closing down on Christians big time. But it's coming from the economic or the financial alluring, if you're going to use that word, from Modi and the regime there, pulling rank and offering financial support to nations that will be on their side. So it really has a big influence now on that Asian area around them. So, a place like Myanmar, we know that the suffering that they've had recently, Bangladesh and all these others are having to kind of bow down in a way to this financial promise of help if you follow our way. So they have a huge influence beyond their own boundaries now, India, and they've become like evangelical Hindus, really, because of the leadership of the nation.
It's interesting, when I've been there previously, Alistair, You mentioned evangelical Hindus, and yet the message is one of destruction. It's one of we're going to force you to come back. We're going to, and there are movements that seek to restore people to their Hindu identity that are there and that are in play, often by means of force, by suppression, including there's in addition to the figures that we've already given, a 74% rise in hate speech incidents last year compared to 2023. About 10% of those incidents, 1,165 incidents recorded, targeted Christians, a population that makes up just 2.3% of the population. So it's very, very lopsided. Tellingly, about 80% of incidents recorded occurred in states controlled by the BJP. But again, when you have a doctrine, a dogma that is rooted in so many different texts, there are thousands of sutras, it is impossible to collate and edit a complete compendium of the Hindu scriptures. Is simply impossible. It's an amalgamation. I mean, Hinduism is a colonial term anyway, to describe the wealth of belief systems, similar but also varying in the Indus River Valley. It was a British colonial term that's now been kind of adopted and accepted. But you have different branches, different ideas of who the God or the gods are. There are some versions that are semi-monotheistic. They would claim a kind of Trinitarian type formula, but it's not at all the same. But throughout and consistently in those sutras, in Bhagavad Gita, in some of the other writings, you have the words of the gods, particularly Krishna, saying, "I am the Lord of Death. I am death. I am all surpassing." And the message that I was going to, and there were mixed groupings. Some of the training centers we went to, some of the schools we went to, I was told after the fact that was really good. They wouldn't tell me who was there beforehand or what the demographic was, and afterwards they were like, "Oh, that was really," the pastor's like, "That was really good. It was strong, I think." In fact, so tell me about how many were believers there. "Oh, maybe one or two." It's like, so what were the rest? Mostly Hindu. It's like, but I was saying, I don't worship the God of death. I worship the God of life. I worship the one who says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." Yeah. And that's the difference between those who are truly evangelical followers of Jesus Christ and these evangelical Hindus. They don't offer good news. No. We offer, these who are suffering, even through their suffering, continue to offer good news.
Yeah, and I mean, the point you're making there is when we take the news of Jesus or Christianity, we're offering them an opportunity to choose life and not death, to choose blessing and not cursing. But it's not an enforcement. I mean, maybe in the past there's been a little bit of a over-militarization of it, but generally we are taking a message that gives them hope for a future. But I've heard reports coming back to me from my kind of contacts in India, of particularly in the rural areas, where you get the strong arm of Hinduism going into which are Christian communities and enforcing them literally with a gun to their head, saying, "Convert back to Hinduism or you lose your life." That's enforcement. You just couldn't imagine us going out as Christians in that way. But then you think back in our history, the Crusades and so on, it wasn't that much different. But we've learned that we are offering people a choice to make the right choice and not enforcing them with a gun at their head.
Now, of course, there are going to be some there are activists within India, who speak to the situation there and say this report is nonsense, and that there are individuals who say, no, India stands as a beacon of freedom of religion and belief. But then we have groups that are bipartisan, that are, you can even say, ecumenical, like the United Christian Forum. They say our own fact-finding groups within India have found that such incidents of hate crimes against Christians have quadrupled since Narendra Modi assumed office as Prime Minister 11 years ago. In Uttar Pradesh, there are at least 100 pastors in prison without trial on frivolous charges of proselytization under harsh anti-conversion laws there. And there are many states within India, and there are different rules, different laws that some of the states will have. Some are harsher than others, but Uttar Pradesh particularly does seem to be kind of the epicenter of persecution. As well, of course, you have Manipur as well, where there's a significant issue that's being experienced there. But we see that there's vigilante mobs, particularly. It says states wink at or are complicit in their inaction vis-a-vis religious persecution by vigilante mobs or militant private actors. And this is a very, very real concern.
And this is, why we do the program, to make people aware of what's really happening. We're not saying it's the only thing, but it's a danger to our Christian brothers and sisters, particularly those in leadership, those who are pastoring churches. They are being attacked, they're being beaten, they're being, as we've heard with the rods and so on. And like the report said, we've watched earlier from CBN, we just need to be aware so that we're prayerful, that we're understanding that Christianity is being constricted, there's attempts to restrict it and trying to wipe it out. Even in India, I mean, we kind of expect it in certain Islamic nations where it's radical Islam, but in India, which is a nation which we've always looked at and thought this is a peaceful place, it's a peaceful religion, a little bit like Buddhism, which again is not as peaceful as we think it is. There is terrible, terrible attacks coming against our brothers and sisters, and we need to be aware of it in order to be prayerful. So if you are running an intercession group wherever you are watching today, I just ask you to do some research and pray for that nation, and pray for our Christian brethren in that nation, because there is historically a very strong connection between our nation and India, the subcontinent. And of course we have a lot of Indian people here in our nation, a lot of Indian Christians in our nation, and we really need to be aware of what is going on. And I urge you, if you're a Christian church in an Asian community here in this nation, don't forget to lift this nation, India up, and your brothers and sisters there to the Lord, and pray for their protection. Pray that they would be fruitful. That's the call of God. John 15:16. He appoints us to go out and bear fruit that shall remain. So please, I urge you, get into prayer. Be sure that you're aware of what's going on, and let other people in the community know about the situation. It's a very important time.
It is. Luke 21:28, when these things begin to take place, speaking of all of these trials, he says, straighten up and raise your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. So stay strong to our brothers and sisters in India. We love you. We pray for you. We are with you. God be with you and continue to use you mightily to see a mighty harvest for his name.